I have unfortunately been divorced twice. My children have seen lots of male role models or people come in and out of their life. We've had some very different phases in their experience of life. There's certain things that I've learned that we have to learn to self-regulate as adults. And if we don't learn to do it as kids, then we're never ever going to be able to do it.
If a child or a teenager puts their parent on a pedestal and then there's a crack, everything comes tumbling down.
Forcing is never going to work, and if you're forcing because it's a you issue, it's even more not going to work, because children can sniff out a you issue in 2 seconds and they'll dig their heels into the ground.
How do you explain to a child, teenager, when mum and dad are in a difficult place?
The thing that my adult children will talk about most is my development as a person, more than anything that I said or did.
Hello and welcome to season 1 of Bridging the Gap, the podcast where parents and teenagers come to understand each other better through honest, respectful, thoughtful conversation. In each episode, I sit down with someone who has a unique window into the teenage world. Whether it's a parent, a teacher, a coach, or the teen themselves, we talk openly about the things that often go unspoken. Mental health, peer pressure, identity, spirituality, technology, and everything in between. If you find something here that speaks to you, please do hit the subscribe button. It really keeps us going. This is Bridging the Gap. In today's episode, I'm joined by Charlotte Kalms. Charlotte is a mother of 6, stepmom to 4, and a grandmother to twin girls. She's a medical and birth advocate and a business strategy consultant. But what makes this conversation powerful isn't just what she does, it's what she's lived. Her life has been shaped by divorce, bereavement, remarriage, and the ongoing reality of raising a blended family. And through all of it, she's had to parent, not from theory, but from experience. Charlotte brings emotional honesty, strategic clarity, and a deep belief that parenting is a long game. That resilience is already inside our children and often inside us too. Today we're going to talk about navigating family through rupture and rebuilding, parenting while carrying your own grief, raising children in a blended home, and what it really means to hold space when things aren't neat. This one is thoughtful, real, and deeply human. Let's begin. Charlotte, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Really is a pleasure. Obviously, we've known each other for a number of years. I've had the zechus of teaching some of your lovely children.
Thank you for doing so.
All of in their excellent ways. It was never a boring day. Say that much. Never,
sure.
Never a boring day. So before we jump into, I guess this is going to be pretty much jumping in. All so right. You've got quite a big and broad story. So to give a little bit of context before we get into, let's say, the parenting discussions, I guess what's brought you to this point today? And after hearing that introduction, and we mentioned briefly the certain things that you yourself have experienced, makes you actually strong enough to talk about it on a podcast?
Well, really, I'm here because you asked me to be, and also because I asked my children how they felt about me talking on a podcast, and the level of enthusiasm in their response for me to come was actually the main impetus for me doing so. I feel like when my children were growing up, they were, for various reasons, looking for role models, and they really found, each one of them actually, in their individual relationships with you, somebody who they really looked up to and respected, and who really was able to guide them, understand them, and meet them where they were at. And so they were extremely excited that you wanted to talk to me.
Gosh, I hope they don't know what you're going to say.
Well, they really were very generously open about that, and they really, really feel individually that they've benefited from their relationship with you, and from, it's not just the relationship that they have with you, but it's also from the modeling that they took from you. And I think modeling is actually a really big theme, and is, when you ask me what's brought me here, I think that life has given me enough experiences that I have sort of tried and tested some things out in lots of different scenarios. And many of those things are still a work in progress. And some things, mainly what I know is what doesn't work, like what hasn't worked. And anything that I think is working is only working as of today. And I reserve the right to change my position. Strong enough. The reason I feel strong enough is because I myself have really strong role models. I have really, really good friends. I have a supportive family. Thank God I'm remarried. I have a very supportive husband. And fundamentally, I think that with my children, I think that they would all say that there's a lot in the emotional bank account. We talk a lot about an emotional bank account. I think it's actually a Stephen Covey concept. I think it came from him originally. I mean, I'm sure it's not only him, but I think that's where we learned it from. And the idea is that you build up an emotional bank account in any relationship, but I feel about it in relation to my children. And that this allows you to be in credit when things are difficult. And when things are difficult, you deplete that bank account like any other kind of bank account. And you have to make sure that there's enough in there so that even under the most stressful circumstances, the bank account is not in overdraft. And if it does get into overdraft, then your absolute priority over and above anything else is to rebuild that emotional bank account.
So I've heard of this concept used before, definitely in terms of in marriage. Do you think you have one for yourself?
An emotional bank account with myself?
It's
a really good question. Not always. But I would say that at this stage of my life, I have learnt that it's critical to my ability to cope, to function, and to be able to show up for my kids. And in fact, I would say without question, and my kids would definitely agree with this, that when I am the least good as a parent, it's usually because I've overextended myself, whether it's overextended myself in relation to them or overextended myself in life in general. And actually, one of my kids was just saying this to me yesterday, that I had tried to help this child with certain things certain challenges that they were facing. And in my efforts to help them, I had overextended myself. I had done more than even they felt was needed in order to help them in their circumstances and the various different situations. And I started to become resentful or overwhelmed and take it out on them. And my child said to me, this is from you. You have overextended yourself.
Oh gosh, when does that start? What age is that?
Well, these are adult children. This particular one was an adult child, but I would say if children are self-aware, they can probably start to communicate those messages from round about 18, 19. I think before then, it's unlikely that they would have the foresight, certainly in the moment, the insight in the moment. They might have it in hindsight. And I think that it's our responsibility as parents to acknowledge where we are overextending ourselves and to make sure that we don't project that onto our children. Self-care is like a word that's used a lot to describe, this act. But I actually see it as service to our children as well. Like I remember when I had a baby, or one of my babies, I don't remember which baby it was, somebody saying to me, you have to remember that your baby needs you to feed mummy first, right? So as when you're nursing a baby, especially when I had a bunch of kids, very young kids at the same time, I had to learn that I had to sit down and eat something before I was able to feed the baby and, look after various other children. And that same principle applies. And I would say that in the majority of cases, certainly that it doesn't go away as your children get older. The exertion looks different. It's not as physical, it's also mental. And children don't know how much we think about them and how much we invest in them. And sometimes we're resentful because they don't see and appreciate what it is that we've contributed, but they couldn't possibly. And we sometimes have to reclaim that. So I'll give you another example. We had it was a funny joke in our family, which the kids will laugh that I'm telling the story, but that when we used to sit down on a Friday night, especially when now some of the kids are away from home, one's been in yeshiva university, abroad, in the army, different things. So when there's a group of children together on a Friday night, we'll have a lovely time. And then it will progress into the section of Friday night, which is, let's all tell Ima all the things she did wrong when we were children. And it just descends into this conversation. And it starts off funny. It will start off funny. It was like, do you remember the time when, I don't even remember, right? Things that they remember from their childhood, when you didn't let me go to my friend's party and you, whatever it was, right? So it starts off like that and it builds. And it's funny up to a point. And then sometimes it's not funny. And I used to sit there and take it over and over again. And I used to think that it was just part of the routine of the family. Like this was what happened. And eventually, at one point in the relatively recent past, at a certain point in this conversation, I said to the children, I just want to make it clear, like, I'm actually a human being, like I'm a real person here. And if every time we come together and I make Shabbos and I do all of this, this is what ends up happening, then I end up feeling really bad. And they kind of looked at me like, wow, we never really thought about it from your perspective. Like it wasn't even malicious. They were like, we're so sorry. We didn't mean to be mean. And I was like, but it actually is mean. Like it's funny once or twice, but it can become cumulatively mean. And the truth is that was entirely on me. It was entirely on me. And I think that with small children, there is a lot of Mesiras Nefesh which is needed, which is, a lot of selflessness, I guess is the right way, to self-sacrifice in order to look after small children. With adult children, some of that changes. And again, back to your original question, I think that I've learned to take responsibility for my own limits, for my own self-regulation and self-care. Doesn't mean I always get it right. And to know what my strengths and weaknesses are, to be able to own them and to be able to show up as my imperfect self in relation to my children, for better or worse.
Is your business or product just not being seen? Then this is for you. Bridging the Gap is reaching thousands across the Jewish community on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Every episode is cut into short clips and shared across all platforms so your message gets seen again and again. And because it's a podcast, it doesn't get missed or thrown away like a flyer or a newspaper. It stays. If you want your brand to be seen across the London Jewish community and by thousands across the globe, email sales@bridgingthegappodcast.com and speak to one of the team.
So it's so funny. The more guests that we have on, it all seems to come down to this open communication seems to be key. The thing that I really taken for what you said in the last few minutes is this idea of the bank account. I guess it makes total sense for oneself. You mentioned that we have to have a bank account between us and our kids, so that when there are difficult times, you can sort of, if you need to chip away at that for whatever good reason there is. Do the kids need their own bank accounts themselves? The teenagers need their own one themselves. And I think about how our teenagers are living today. But this is totally like off script, but I'm very happy. It's like, just because you brought this up, I'm looking at teenagers today and the ones that I interact with. I don't know if they have their own bank account themselves. I understand that in the context what you were speaking is that if we have a bank account between us and then we get in an argument, okay, so there's what to chip away from. But a kid shows up, or a teenager rather, shows up to a space and they're depleted, they're in debt.
Yeah. So I think you're right, a lot of teenagers are. And I think there's a lot of different ways that as parents we can show up to teach them how to not be in debt, right? So there's the obvious ones that we know, which is sleep debt, right? A lot of teenagers are literally in sleep debt.
I was just going to say that. When I meet them at 9 a.m, I can tell straight away who's been up till 5.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them, because the companies keeping them up till 5 are massive, multi-billion-dollar companies.
Yeah. So that's a massive thing, right?
Yeah.
Sleep debt. And I mean, the whole subject of screens and phones is a whole podcast in and of itself. I have to say my personal approach to it, and I've discussed this with my children, the older ones now, has been to teach them to self-regulate rather than to impose regulation. That is because I have raised 6 of them, and I made mistakes with the older ones. Okay. I was much more controlling with my older children in terms of that, and they never learned self-regulation. So all that happened is that I could control them up to a point, and whatever point I couldn't control them, they had no tools to control themselves when it came to these things. And that led to, in all different ways, various forms of addiction to screens and technology and all that kind of stuff, or lying or deception or hiding or all kinds of things in order to get at it. And actually I realized that I'd created the beast because I didn't give them any tools to self-regulate. So it was just control or absence of control, or bypassing control. So screens is the main thief of sleep, I think, for teenagers.
What age would you say that's applicable from, though, the self-regulation?
I think if you think your child is old enough to give them a phone, then part of that decision is around their ability to understand the concept of self-regulation. So I think they sit hand in hand. This is my personal opinion. So people say, I gave my child a phone at this age because it was their bar mitzvah, or because their friends all had one, or because they didn't want to be left out of social events. All the reasons that people give for the decision that they give a child a phone. My opinion is that if you feel that your child is responsible enough to have a phone, part of that is, are they responsible enough to regulate? Now, that might be with your help. That might be an agreement with them that they leave the phone in your room. But that's a conversation to be had. And it's not a top-down strategy. And my older kids will laugh because I used plenty of top-down strategies when they were
What's a top-down strategy?
My parents say. Top-down strategy I'm in charge. Control. I get to do it. Controlling strategy. Right? Your phone is in my room at whatever time. Right? So I think particularly with screens, I don't feel this about everything, right? But I do feel with screens that the most important thing, because children will find a way to bypass anything that you impose on them with control, whether it's a second device, a hidden device, a friend's device, VPN, going onto the neighbor's internet. They'll find a way, and they can buy a phone online in 5 minutes and they'll never know that they have. So there is no benefit in the control, because unless a child asks you for it, sometimes my children will say to me, take my phone. because they need help. So obviously, we're here to help our children. That's our job. And if you see that a child is not self-regulating, you have a responsibility as a parent to involve yourself and help them to regulate. If you see that a child is not sleeping at night because they're on screens, you have to get involved.
Right.
But the way to do it is not to confiscate the phone. The way
I would say it's as a facilitator, not a manipulator.
That's great. Brilliant. Yeah. So I that's exactly what it is. Much better said than me. You said it in 2 words.
So that's when it comes to that was
Sorry,
me.
I
jumped in on that.
Yeah.
Come back to the bank account.
Yeah,
then.
the bank account. Okay. So the second part about the emotional bank account, I think it's very important for young people to have an emotional bank account. Another thing that I think parents play a really important role in, and this is something that I still struggle with to work out how to navigate, particularly with adult children, is that children and teenagers are less social than ever. As soon as they have a device, their human-to-human interactions are massively diminished. So therefore, the actual humans that they interact with outside of school are largely their parents. There's much less interaction with friends except on Shabbos.
Okay, yeah.
So we've gone to a time where the actual human interaction that children have. My older kids after school would play on the street with friends. They would go out into the street and play with friends. My younger children, it would never even occur to them, because if they want to speak to their friend, they'll just go on FaceTime and speak to them.
Yeah.
Right? The teenagers, right? So again, it depends on what access to technology your kids have. My kids, other than my youngest, my kids all have access to technology. So they have less social interactions. They have very sophisticated relationships with people that they have met very little in real life, right? They meet people through a friend or whatever it will be.
And those are all on the screen.
They're all on screen.
So can they get to a sophisticated level?
I think they can.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they can. I'm not a believer that you cannot have a real relationship with somebody if you don't spend a lot of time with them. Some of my meaningful conversations with people in my life are on WhatsApp, on text. So I think children are capable of that. But what it does do is it limits their capacity for real in-person interaction. So for example, some of my children will prefer a conversation about something important to be on the phone or on a video call than they will in person, right? So they're uncomfortable to have a conversation in person, and they're more comfortable to have it on a phone, or they'll think that it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time to sit down and have a conversation about something. Why don't you just text me?
So you're starting in debt for difficult scenarios that by definition often need one-to-one actual interaction.
So basically my position is that we have to help them to build up a bank account of human-to-human contact. And you have to find a way to do that. Now, obviously, the really great way that we have is Shabbos, right? Shabbos is a really positive opportunity to build an emotional bank account. In my family, we still have family supper time every night of the week.
Do you?
Yeah, every night.
I grew up like that.
Yeah, every night of the week there's family supper time. It might only be 20 minutes, but it happens every single night. There is a point when everyone's called to the table and we all sit down and we eat together.
That's brilliant.
Now, I have one son at home who works, so he's not home at that point, right? And, there's occasionally this one's got something. But as a general rule, we wait until the vast majority of the household. So at the moment, I would say at least 5 of us. And we sit down every night for 15, 20 minutes and we have supper together every single night.
Do you have to be super organized, though, to do that?
No. You make the supper earlier in the day and then you have to pay attention. But in our house, I would say it happens sometime between 5 and 6:30 p.m. That's still the time that people want to eat. So at some point between 5 and 6:30 p.m., you have to be aware of the fact that enough people are around and you just call everyone to supper and that's it. But it's a thing. The thing is, it's not an option to just go and eat by yourself. That's not an option. There's no buffet. It's not a kind of like, I fancy eating at 5. Okay, great. Go see if everybody's ready. So-and-so's not ready. Okay, so we're going to eat in 20 minutes. So it's part of the culture of our home is that we sit down and have supper together. So that is an important human-to-human interaction. There's no phones at the table. There's no AirPod in your ears.
I was going to ask you about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No phones, no AirPod in your ears. During that, it's, as I say, it could be 15 minutes.
At school now, I have to go, no phone, no AirPod. I get them sometimes to shake their head.
Yeah.
And then it's no watch either.
Right. Because
it's literally like taking the devices is off of them. Yeah. But that's definitely a huge one. Yeah, that's often what we're seeing. I guess parents don't see this, but as teachers and rebbes in school, what we're seeing is we are getting some of those, not all of them, but some, and probably more than what parents would expect. So I don't think a lot of parents know what time their kids go to sleep, and you can't really necessarily control that. But when they come in and they're having those interactions in school, they're sleep deprived, their dopamine centers are fried out, I mean, I know some boys that will wake up at 4 a.m. by mistake, but then stay up.
Yeah.
And so by the time they arrive then to Shachris at 8:45, to get them from that, the dopamine stimulation on steroids world into then text it's
crazy. So I would argue that even if as a parent you don't know what time your child is falling asleep, most of us as parents should know how our children are waking up. And you can tell how a child slept by how they wake up. If you have to drag that kid out of bed to get them to school, they're not sleeping well enough.
Mm-hmm.
If that child can barely string a sentence together or they're irritable, then you know they haven't slept well enough. It's not that you have to be checking on them all the time till 2 a.m. to check that they've gone to sleep. But we have a responsibility as parents to understand, even with our adult children, how they're, anybody who's living in our home who's under our care, I think we have a responsibility to know how they're doing. It's our job. It's part of our job. And the way I do that is with interacting them in the morning. So because I regularly interact with all of my children, even if it's briefly in the morning, if I notice that somebody's struggled to get out the house for a couple of days in a row, sometimes even one, but generally if it's more than 1 or 2 days in a row, I'll have a chat with them, not then and there on their way out the front door, but another point. And it will be like, what do you think's going on? Are you struggling to sleep? What could we do about it? Whatever. And my children have learnt, I would say the youngest 4 children are all extremely good at this sleep hygiene and self-regulation. Of course, everybody has a bad night. We all do. And something goes on. But they are all really good at going to sleep at night and waking up in the morning and being able to function. And it's very clear when they're not. My older 2 are much worse at it. They're much less disciplined because, again, I think that with my eldest, I was very strict, and with my second, I was very lax. Mm-hmm. And I don't think either of those things are right. With the others, I created a life that revolved around a routine that encourages them to be their best self. So, and they took responsibility for that. It's on them at this point. All I'm doing is just observing it and stepping in. Nobody has a bedtime in my house other than my 7-year-old. There's no bedtime. I think bedtimes ended in my house when kids were about bar mitzvah. I think that was my rule. I can't remember for sure, but I think it was like, if Hashem thinks you're old enough to keep Torah mitzvahs, you're old enough to figure out when you want to go to bed. I think that was the line. And then they were allowed to self-regulate. By the way, I have that rule with a lot of things, like with food. So like, there's no rules about what nush you can eat in the house. There's no rules about like none of that is controlled. So I give them a lot of autonomy. And some of my kids got really into nush, stuffed their face, put on loads of weight, felt horrible, and then got really into exercise and self-regulation and figured out that it wasn't good for them. Another one messed up their teeth, right? Not to the point that it was like, I don't let them get to the point that it's like really severe. Obviously I would step in, but there's certain things that I've learned that we have to learn to self-regulate as adults. And if we don't learn to do it as kids, then we're never, ever going to be able to do it.
If you're listening to this podcast and thinking this is exactly what we're dealing with at home, or our school is facing these challenges right now, then I want you to know something. Bridging the Gap is no longer just a podcast. I formally launched Bridging the Gap Consultancy, a premium advisory service working with parents, schools, shuls, and community organizations navigating complex teenage dynamics. For parents, that might mean structured strategy around communication breakdown, ADHD or neurodiversity, behavioral escalation, or mediation between family and school. For organizations, it could mean a full youth provision audit, stakeholder interviews, a forward-thinking strategic report, or ongoing partnership to strengthen youth engagement and culture. This isn't coaching, it's strategic insight, practical implementation, and measurable change. If you'd like to explore working together, you can book a complimentary 30-minute consultation via the website bridgingthegapconsultancy.com. Details are in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
So I'm a massive, massive believer in that. I tend to say as a teacher, what teachers generally try and do is we try and keep bechira on this side of the desk. So I will control everything from what we're learning to the exact seating plan and there's some good parts to that. You need structure and routine, etc., but we don't do our kids a favor when we hold bechira too tightly. You said it yourself. At 13 years old, Hashem decided, 13 or 12. Hashem decided that this. They're now going out of the child stage into the teenage stage. And this is where they're learning the ropes. They're not expected to do everything straight away, but they're expected to start properly learning. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to start learning before that age.
Yeah.
That was the rabbis. The rabbis said, you should start doing stuff with your children so they'll know what to do. But in terms of the Torah, there's no mitzvah before that time. And then when they get to this stage, that's when bechira kicks in. And I forget, I don't know if I'm right, and I'm sure everything is sort of context dependent, but then if I, as the adult in the room or the parent in the room, then try and hold on to that bechira, almost like take it away from them, it doesn't work.
100%.
Short term, it can be fantastic.
Listen, I don't envy the role of a teacher in a classroom, but I 100% agree with you. And I think we talk a lot about how at bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah that you have all these obligations, which is true, and you have the opportunity, you have all these commitments that you have to make, but we also don't talk about the responsibility. I remember Rebbe and Seema Spetner, I did a chinuch course with her many years ago, and she said, do you understand that your bar mitzvah boy, who's like struggling with his tefillin, has exactly the same chiyuvim as his 92-year-old grandfather or great-grandfather? Exactly the same in halacha. Like, he is the same. Hashem has decided this child is able to make decisions, forget responsibilities, is able to make choices to do or to not do, bechira, as you described, and those are the same. We give him the same autonomy in halacha as we do to an old man. I know there's other elements to chinuch, I get that, but on principle, right, the broad principle, we should take that seriously. If we're raising children to live in a Torah lifestyle, we should trust that Hashem knows what he's talking about. We get, I said to somebody, I heard it recently, I said, we must stop trying to do Hashem's job for him and start doing Hashem's work.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we always think we know better, right? Especially when it comes to our children. Another brilliant line that I heard recently is Hashem doesn't have any grandchildren, right? Everyone's Hashem's children. But we think that our children are Hashem's grandchildren. We think, I'm in a relationship with Hashem and I'm telling Hashem what I need to do for my kids because they're his grandchildren. They're one step removed, right? So we channel everything through to our children. But in fact, Hashem's got it. Like, he knows our kids as well as he knows us. So it's not like, I know best, so please can you make sure, like, that's about tefillah, but also the way that we parent. Like, we think we know best, but actually, if you step back and you take Torah as a blueprint, a girl of 12 or a boy of 13 is perfectly capable to make a decision between right and wrong. They are able to do that.
And even though I believe in it, like, when you say that, I'm thinking with that level of empowerment, the key to that is you have to be able to accept failure.
100%. You have to be able to accept failure. You have to be okay with your kids failing. By the way, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that I give all my children complete autonomy from the age of 12 or 13. I'm just telling you that it's a value. And the main thing I have to work on is me. Because what happens is I give my children choice. Yeah, you get to choose. Then they make a choice I don't like. Yeah. But I've given them the power to choose.
Correct.
And then I get upset that they made a choice I don't like.
Yeah.
Right? And then they say to me, but it was my choice to make. That's a me issue, not a them issue.
Right. Yeah. You get, if you've given them the choice, then they have to have an ability to fail.
And that goes back to the emotional bank account. My value system is that my children have the capacity to make choices. That is a value that I hold. My responsibility is to give them information and education and context and values, right? If I've done my job of communicating my values, given them the information about the way I see the world, what's right, what's wrong, given them the tools to make decisions, created a safe space for them to experiment, to try and to fail, then my job is actually to step out the way. And I do not get this right all the time. I just got it wrong yesterday. Like, I probably got it wrong today as well. I just haven't seen much of them because I came here in the evening, like, I get this wrong all the time, but it's a value. It's for me, it's a really important value. And I think that it allows us to allow our children to succeed and fail and to be okay with that because we did our job as best as we could.
It's the little voice in the head that goes, but what if they mess up? But then my answer to that is arguably is that you might be further along. They might be further along on their journey than if they hadn't. So I give an example. Many years ago, I used to know a boy who really struggled to fill in, really struggled to put his tefillin on. And I once spoke to him about it. Some days, some days I once spoke to him about it, and he said, "Can I be honest with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, no point not being honest." He said, "I'm really angry at God," and he gave a good number of reasons. And the conversation is always, I'm listening and I'm saying, "I understand you," right? And then we had a meeting at some point later on amongst the teachers and the rebbes about how can we measure success. And one of the measuring points of success was, do they put tefillin on every day? And I said at the meeting, I said, look, I just want to put this out there. I don't know. And happy for there to be kickback on it. It's like, I said, I don't know. You've got the boy who puts on tefillin every day because his parents tell him, you must put on tefillin. You have to. And if you don't, and by the way, I'm a big fan of tefillin, just putting it out there. Then next to him is the kid that really struggles to put it on because he's angry at Hashem. I said, all I know about those two children is that the first one who puts on every day, I know nothing about his relationship with Hashem. It might be okay, might be great, there might be nothing. I don't know. I just know his parents are really, really forceful with it. The second boy, all I know about him is that he's got a really deep sensitivity to the fact that there is a God. He's really involved in my life. Like, he really cares about me, and I'm really angry. Now measure that. I mean, and
Absolutely
so it's
brilliant. And this is why my boys related to you so much, because, and I will tell you that there are many times, and I'm being completely honest here, where I didn't have that perspective and you did with my own kids. And they would say to me, I've discussed this with Rabbi Birnbaum.
Oh, no.
No, and they were right. They were right. So I made many, many mistakes trying to push my children to perform mitzvahs or to perform anything. One of the biggest arguments we used to have in my house, I mean, this is just funny for people. One of the biggest arguments we used to have in my house is, what is the definition of Shabbos clothes? Okay, and you know my boys, right? I have very independent thinkers. What is the definition of Shabbos clothes? What defines something as acceptable Shabbos clothes? And let's say that you go with the idea that Shabbos clothes should involve a white shirt. Let's say. You would be amazed how many variations there are of a white shirt that would make the average person uncomfortable, right? And then that's not to mention anything else, right? The conversation about what was Shabbos clothes, the amount of wasted hours of my life that I spent on what defines Shabbos clothes, Hashem's going to laugh, forget anything else. Ad me'ever esrim, but it's like, it was ridiculous. I put way too much attention on what defines Shabbat clothes. Like, it was just a stupid argument to have. How many times, I mean, okay, so back to the subject of the fact that I have unfortunately been divorced twice. So my children have been through 2 divorces, and thank God I'm married for a 3rd time, but my children have seen lots of male role models or people come in and out of their life, actually with different hashkafas, different religious outlooks in different communities. We've had some very different phases in their experience of life. And one of the conversations that we've had in more recent years was that they have taken from me all the feminine values that I projected into them and none of the masculine ideology. So, for example, me pressurizing them to put on tefillin never had an impact. Never. It didn't matter what. One kid liked Minyan Miles, which was a concept that I learned from when I worked in informal Jewish education, which was a point system. Actually, 2 of them bought into that. A point system. We used to have an app on the phone with pocket money, and I basically paid them to put on tefillin. So the more mitzvahs they did, if they done with a minyan or whatever, I would give that. It was pennies at a time, and it would accumulate to money. So they did it for that, but they did it for the money. They were motivated by money, and they did it for that, not because of a relationship with Hashem. And those children do not have a better relationship with tefillin than the ones that refuse to do it. Okay, I have 5 boys, Kanai Hora, 4 over the age of bar mitzvah, and I can tell you, they would tell you themselves, every single one of them struggled with tefillin for different long periods of time, and every single one of them puts on tefillin every day now. And it did not come about through me. It came about through them having the space and time to be able to find their way into a relationship with Hashem where the tefillin meant something.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It does come about through you. Yeah. If sometimes as a parent, and I say this to myself also, if you step away.
100%. And it was the stepping away, not the stepping in. 100%. Yeah. I agree. I stepped away, and in stepping away, there was 2 elements. I'm the mother, so they actually didn't want me to be talking to them about tefillin. It wasn't a thing for them. I think all of them would say that. But the second point was, even if it wasn't a male mitzvah, stepping away and knowing when to step away is so important. And so much of the not stepping away is because we're worried about what other people will think and say, either about our children or about us as parents. And again, that's an us issue.
Yeah, it reminds me of, because you mentioned all the Shabbos clothes. I remember years ago, this might be going about 8 years ago, and I just remember saying my son wanted to come to shul on a Friday night, and he wanted to come with in his school uniform. And I said to my wife, no, he has to come in Shabbos clothes. He has to come. My wife says to me, but he wants to go to shul, so at least let him come in. I said, no. She said to me, okay, is this for him or is this for you? I said, what do you mean? Of course it's for him. It's Shabbos, right? It's Shabbos, it's for him. She said, are you going to be embarrassed? So I stopped, thought about it, and go, yeah, I probably will be. She said, okay, so that's a you issue. Now leave him alone. Wise words.
Yeah.
And that's it. I think I have to deal with this story popped. I was speaking to a parent recently, and the son's been on a very, very difficult journey. Very difficult journey. It's not easy, and I'm not judging anyone. But I remember they had a family simcha, and the son came back for the family simcha. And I said to the mother, it must be so nice to have your son here. And she said to me, we are so embarrassed. And I'm not judging. I get that. I really get that.
Forcing is never going to work. And if you're forcing because it's a you issue, it's even more not going to work, because children can sniff out a you issue in 2 seconds and they'll dig their heels into the ground. Children do not want to carry the emotional responsibility for their parents. They're not interested. They shouldn't have to. We make them do it. They're not responsible as children. I do think adult children have some degree of responsibility for treating us as humans. Like I said, like I'm a real person. So I do think that adult children can have a sense of responsibility in the same way that I know that there are things that I don't say to my spouse or, to my close friends. There are boundaries. And I think children should have those same boundaries with their parents when they reach adulthood. The question is always what those boundaries define as, right? So, and then you get into the whole thing of when they meet that, when they get engaged and they get married and they have spouses, and then they have a whole different set. That's a whole other sort of parasha, a whole other situation. And also when they're getting different values from different homes. So my children have fathers who don't live by the same value system that I live by in any area. They're not similar to me in personality. They're not similar to me in religious practice. They're not similar to me in lifestyle. And my children will have influences from all of those spaces. So therefore, what's acceptable and what's unacceptable becomes very blurred. Mm-hmm. And, I do have friends who, the husband and wife are from very similar backgrounds. They live very similar lives to how they were raised, and their children are raised around an extended family group of neighbors, cousins, siblings, uncles and aunts who are very similar to them. And it's clearer. The value system is clearer. This is what we do as a family extends to a massive group of people. I remember my children turning around to me and say, you say that this is what we do, but there's literally nobody outside of our nuclear household in our family that does this. Like nobody else does it. So why are you saying this is what we do? Like my aunt doesn't do it. My sister, my uncle doesn't do it. My grandpa doesn't do it. No one else does it. So where does it come from? What does that mean? This is what we do, So all these things feed into it. So the definition is very subjective. That's my point. The definition is subjective. And I think that trying to hold on to control is futile. And for me, I always ask myself, do my kids understand my values? Do they understand the things that the fundamental values underneath all the actions and all the behaviors? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's what I do always try and come back to. And by the way, sometimes they do know my values and they don't value the same thing. They just don't, I have children now, I would say out of all our adult children, my husband and I, some have the same values as us. I would say none of them have all the same values as us. They all have their own value systems. And I was just saying actually to my husband the other day, when I look at all our children, I feel like someone took like the DNA, like the threads that were all twisted together that make us, and they pulled out individual threads. And there's like, this thread is really strong in this child, and this thread is really strong in that one. And this value is really, why is that child latched onto that value and this child latched on? There's no way of knowing. I can't look at any of the outcomes. I mean, I'm not done. We're parents forever. But I would say that, I have a nearly 25-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a nearly 21-year-old. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I would say that, a lot of those, a big chunk of the parenting is done. Like there's certain things that you will never do again for those children. So I would say on some level, I see the end result, and there's no correlation between the input and the output into, it's not linear. It just doesn't work that way. Like, it's overall, do I think that fundamentally underneath everything, my children understand my values? The ones I represented the best, they do. The values I showed up and lived the best, they know.
But ultimately, your position is on at least on this in this area is that you're happy for them to choose. I mean, that isn't we choose.
I've made my peace with it. I wouldn't say I'm always happy. That would not be completely true. But I've learnt that about life in general, that we're not here to be happy. That isn't, I mean, we have to be b'simcha, I get that, but it's actually not going to all work out the way that you hoped it will. And you have to be okay. Well, you don't have to, but you'll struggle a lot more if you're not okay. I'm really, really, really genuinely proud of each of my children. Each of them know there are choices that they've made that I don't agree with. I think all of them have made certain choices, certain elements of their life that wouldn't be what I would choose for them. But I constantly learn to choose to respect them because I value the relationship. I think that life also threw me so many curveballs. Everyone was talking about me anyway. So like the fact that my kids weren't fitting in the box, it kind of just was all in the mix of it. I don't take for granted that my circumstances gave me, I guess in some ways, the freedom to be okay quicker, because the illusion of this kind of like perfect life wasn't there in the first place.
Right.
So I think for some families that's much harder, and for some kids that's much harder. I've spoken to kids. Some of my children's friends have come to speak to me because they know that I'm more flexible with the way my kids function, and they'll say to me, but like every single person in my family is similar, and if I don't do this, I'll be the first one for like, you know, of all of the siblings, or in all of my, you know, or whatever, my grandparents. So my kids don't have that. They only have me. And they've learnt that I think that they've all learnt that at the end of the day, I value the relationship over any one individual decision. I mean, obviously there's always red lines, but you know, in the broadest sense of the word. And they're all amazing people. Like they're all really fascinating individuals who are so unique and doing such different things in the world. And that is exciting for me. And the funny thing is, when I look at it, is I see elements of myself and I realize that they're far more a product of who I am than of what I told them.
Yeah, that's the modeling thing you spoke about. So I want to pivot a little bit. Although I could talk about bechira for a very long time, and this one about how exactly you empower the teenagers and to what extent. But I want to pivot a little bit. Let's talk about crisis. How do you talk to a teenager during a crisis? Whether that's a crisis that the parents happening, or whether even if that's one that the teenagers, are going through. I spoke to a couple of years ago. I spoke to a teenager. And there was a crisis with their parent at home. But I remember they came into school carrying that burden, and actually, speaking to a number of staff and very emotional about it, understandably so, because there wasn't really that avenue of communication between that kid just feels, oh my gosh, my world's falling apart. My parents are falling apart. This is falling apart. And the parent, understandably, had said, I'm just going to go to my room and close the door and hide under the covers. Yes, parents need to do that too sometimes, and hope it all goes away. But, neither could communicate to the other one about, so how do you manage a crisis or not?
How do you manage a crisis? So I think that when it's a crisis that you're going through as a parent, so whether it was divorce or I lost my mum to leukemia and she was very sick for about 8 months and I was quite absent during that time. Sorry, I think the first thing is showing up. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. I always said that my children suffered more in the year that I was absent because I was in hospital with my mother before she died than they suffered through my divorces. Because in my divorces, I was physically present. I was physically there. And whilst it was difficult for them to watch me go through it, my experience of their reaction, because they may, how they see themselves is not necessarily the same way I see them. But I saw way more dysregulation in the year after my mother died than I saw in the year after my divorce. Even though I was much more dysregulated after my divorce, I was physically present. So I think the biggest thing is actually to keep showing up. And I think that parents are afraid that their children should see them in an emotional or a dysregulated
That's what I was going to ask.
state.
Can you show up warts and all?
So I think my kids would say sometimes I do that too much. So, like my kids will say that I'm too sensitive, too emotional. I shout too much. I express positively or negatively too much. But I feel like the alternative to that is just shut down and withdraw. Mm-hmm. And that's something I'm always working on in myself. But for me, the way I've shown up in a crisis to my kids is to keep showing up. So they saw me mourn, they saw me cry, they saw me anxious, they saw me confused, they saw me overwhelmed. My children have seen me in all emotional states. I haven't protected them from that. Maybe that's wrong or right. I'm just telling you how I've coped with it.
Yeah.
I think that overall they have learned a lot from it, and they often refer to my experiences when they come across things in their own life. And actually they'll come to me and they'll say, I remember when you went through this, and they feel like they can relate to me because of some element of my experience that they relate to. I don't know who else is supposed to show us emotion if it's not our parents, because our teachers don't do it. And I mean, our friends to some extent do it, but I don't know any other way to be. So
I think a lot of our generation suffered from that. Yeah. Because we didn't see it from the earlier one.
Stiff up the lip.
I just think that was how, no offense, mum and dad, but that's a lot of how they function, that generation.
Yeah. So I think there's one thing is showing your emotion and showing up, even if you're struggling. But the balance is not making your children responsible for your emotion, right? So they're not responsible for fixing it. They're not responsible. Correct. They don't even have to understand it. And that's a challenge. And I haven't always got it right. But again, I talk about my values. That is a value for me. My value is that my children will see my emotion, but they're not responsible if it's not directly related to them. If they've done something that's upset me, then I'll tell them that they've upset me. But assuming something else is going on in my life, that's not their responsibility. I try really hard not to make them responsible for my emotions. And again, that goes back to our original conversation about the emotional bank account, because if I'm carrying a lot of stuff which has nothing to do with them, I will take it out on them in the end if I don't fill my tank. So they are not responsible for that. Yeah, it could be self-care, it could be therapy, it could be phone a friend, it could be whatever, it could be anything. There's lots of different versions of it. But so again, like some people will say it's easier not to show your children emotion because they might feel responsible, or it might hurt them, or it might upset them. I hear that argument. I happen not to be somebody who could do, that's not me. So I can't tell you what it would be like for my kids if I wasn't expressive, because I just am. But I do feel like they have learned from that problems can be solved, that the adults don't always know what to do, but we figure it out. And whilst I think that them seeing the figuring out probably gives them more than that thing that you were describing, where a child has a sense that something's going on, but nobody's really telling them anything. And I think that that's more scary. In times when my children don't know what's going on, whatever it will be, they will come with much more anxiety until I tell them what's going on. Even if when I tell them it's not necessarily something easy for them,
Definitely. I think if a child or a teenager puts their parent on a pedestal, and even, I would say, even an educator, a rabbi, a rebbitzin, a doctor, whatever it is, a therapist, if they're put on a certain pedestal of absolute perfection, and then there's a crack, so then for the person that's put them on that, it's the whole world, everything comes tumbling down. Yeah. And that in itself can be quite...
Yeah.
More, it has more of an impact than necessarily needs to. But we need to then build up that vocabulary to have those conversations with our kids, which isn't easy.
And you also have to have another type of bank account, which is a kind of leadership bank account. So,
I like lots of bank accounts.
Yeah, you do need leadership.
What's a leadership bank account?
You need, I just made that term up right now.
I like it though, go.
The children do need stability. They need to know that the adults have got it, like that we've got this covered. So you can show them vulnerability, and it's very important. But you also have to keep it together enough that they don't feel like their whole life is falling apart. So let's say, for example, when I went through my second divorce, it was extremely traumatic for me. I did not cope well with that. Emotionally, I was not in a good place, right? But there was always dinner on the table, supper time happened every night. Everybody's beds were clean, everybody's laundry was done, everybody had all the things that they needed in order for life to function properly. Yes, they saw me cry. Yes, they saw me go to bed, take to my bed for a period of time, spend more time in bed than I would usually. But I was up in the morning and I took the kids to school that needed to be taken to school. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have permission to let it all go. We don't have, obviously some people don't have a choice, but I felt like I had a responsibility that no matter what's going on, I chose to bring these kids into the world, and I have to show up for them to a certain extent. And, they can't unsee the things that they've seen, but I think that's true of everything. I think that children see things, adults see things all the time that they can't unsee. And that's just real life. Real life is full of lots of complexities, so one child that saw me worrying about money will be driven to have financial security. Another child who saw me struggle emotionally, will look to have a stronger emotional vocabulary. One child that saw me, I don't know, who saw, I don't know, whatever, negative and positive things, right? Now, some of my children will tell me that they love Hashem because they see how I love Hashem, right? So they're modeling. It's all back to the modeling, right? So you have to give enough that they feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to give enough that they feel safe.
I think that sounds superhuman. I mean, I can't even imagine how you managed to do all of that with everything else that was going on.
Yeah, I always used to say that I don't suffer from depression, thank God. I'm very blessed I don't suffer from depression. I suffer from defiance. Like, that is a gift that Hashem gave me. I don't think that I can take credit for that particular thing. I think I can just say thank you to Hashem that I have. I think everyone has resilience, but I think I have access to that. It's something that I have access to. I can rebound. People tell me that I'm constantly reinventing myself, and I think that would be a fair assessment. I'm very grateful to Hashem for that, and I guess that's why he's put me through all these iterations of my life. Hashem's given me the tools to rebuild. I've had enough, so
So I've got two questions I want to ask you, but the first one, I don't know if it's a fair question, so fine. We can always edit it out. It's not live, but I'm just thinking about it because of all the experiences that you've had. Is how do you explain to a child, a teenager, when mum and dad are in a difficult place? There's lots of steps before a total relationship breakdown, but it was just like, the other day I was having, I wouldn't say massive argument. I was having quite a frank discussion about something. It was like so minute, I can't even remember what it was. And my 10-year-old came up to me and said, like, why are you having like a massive row? And I said, how do you open up? And it really wasn't. But how do you open up that conversation when parents are having, difficulties? Just let them observe it, or can someone be open and say, look, yeah, we are struggling with this, or we are working through this, or how do you go about that?
So I think the most important thing here is, I think children, again, this is my personal, some people will completely disagree with this. I think that whatever your children see of tension between you, you have to double down on them seeing reconciliation and positive interaction, right? So what do children need to, step back and say, what does a child need to learn? I would say, a child needs to learn that parents do argue. Parents fight. Sometimes they fight quite hard. Like, sometimes things are not okay, right? That will teach them that fights happen. Now, it's really, really scary if it's just kind of ignored and dismissed and shoved under the carpet. If they see parents reconcile and resolve arguments and converse, and then reconnect and laugh together, or, some people in particular that the children do or don't see them showing physical affection to one another, but they see them laughing together or joking together or sitting down and having supper together or going on a date together, then they learn that ruptures can be repaired, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that that teaching them the repair is so important that I would say it's almost worth them seeing the rupture in order to have the opportunity to teach them the repair. Because the scariest feeling in the world is when you're in an argument with somebody and you can't see a way out. When you think that this is it, the relationship is over. That's the most terrifying. I think it's one of the most terrifying feelings that a person can experience is when you have a moment where you think, this is really bad. What's going to happen? Yeah. And the first time it happens to teenagers with their friends, or it happens, whatever, in a relationship, whatever it is a really scary time. But if the children have learned that there is rupture and there is repair, then their nervous system can re-regulate and they can observe it and they can have a sense of perspective. That doesn't mean that you just have to let it all rip in front of your kids and they should see, I don't think that that's appropriate anyway, because children don't need to know all the ins and outs of what's going on, the details of what's going on in your life. But I don't think it's fundamentally bad for a child to know that today my parents are a bit short with each other, and then tonight they're laughing and joking. And in some ways it holds you accountable, right, to repair. It holds you accountable. My child saw that tension. Now we have to make sure the child sees the reconciliation. That's your responsibility. So in general, I think the repair is more important. I'm not sure if that was your question, or if you were asking me the question about when you tell your children that a relationship is irrevocably broken down.
No, that was my question. Okay. It was more about that. I mean, again, when it comes to, you can answer that one as well if you feel comfortable to, but
it's not, that's not there's not one answer to that.
Okay.
My fundamental view is that children deserve honesty, and they deserve answers to the questions that they ask that are age and stage appropriate without giving them more information than they've asked for.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the case with anything difficult, whether that's a financial crisis or a relationship crisis or a wider family situation. You know what I mean? It's not just like your parents are getting divorced. There's lots of things that happen in life that are big things, parent losing a job or, so I think that it's important that children feel that if they're old enough to hear and understand what's being said, that they're old enough to being given the time for a conversation that's age and stage appropriate, which is honest. And I have no problem saying to my children, the answer to that question is not something that's age and stage appropriate. Or I understand that you want an answer to that question, but you're not going to like the answer that you get. And it's my job to protect you. And so I'm not going to answer that question right now. But the question is valid. I have no problem telling them I'm not going to answer a question, but that doesn't mean that they can't ask it. And then they might ask, why won't you answer it? And I can have a whole conversation with them about why I won't answer it. And I have the confidence to say that's not a piece of information I'm going to share with you. So, yeah, I think when it comes to tension, of course, my kids, if they ever see my husband and I, even in the slightest bit, short or tense with one another, I'm sure that the first thought that comes to their mind is, are they going to get divorced again? I think that would be a natural reaction.
Right, yeah.
After what they've been through. But what they see is they see us repair constantly.
Mm-hmm.
We don't fight constantly, but any tension that they experience, they would see repair. And by the way, in relationships with children, the repair is so important. And the hardest thing is when you're in a situation with a child where you're struggling to repair. And, one of my kids, I remember we had a really tough time at one stage. He was really struggling and he found it really difficult to be connected to my values and to what I wanted for him and to the choices that I felt he should be making. And I wasn't communicating well and he wasn't communicating well. And it was really bad for a while. And I remember so distinctly, he wasn't living at home at the time. And I was on the phone to him and I said to him, I don't care how long this takes. I'm going to make contact with you every single day until we repair this. And you don't have to respond. And if you want to respond and say, I hate you and I want nothing to do with you, you have my permission. I'm not necessarily going to react to it, but I'm going to continue to engage with you every single day until this is resolved. And it took some time, and that a lot of the communications went unanswered or whatever. And over a period of time, I don't even remember how it was resolved. But what I know is to this day, that child remembers that during that period of time, I continued to show up for the relationship. And he'll talk about it and he'll tell other people about it. He'll tell me these friends were in conflict with one another and I told them the story about how you always stayed in touch. And, so I can't remember what we argued about. I can't remember how we resolved the argument. But what we both remember is how we both committed to continuing to show up in that relationship until we were able to resolve it.
I think all of relationships are up and down. There's always going to be times that are difficult, whether that's in a marriage or whether that's with kids or parents or grand. There's all sorts of colleagues. It's always going to be up and down. But especially, I don't know if this is true, but I definitely see a lot with the work I do with parents and teenagers that there seems to be a finality to a rupture, like it's checkmate.
Is it?
And it isn't. I think all relationships, definitely, like you said, can be repaired. You're obviously a strong personality, which is a really good thing. And you've got quite a strong value system structure around how you wish to bring up a household, and then you bring other children into that. How does that work?
How does it work? Well, first of all my stepchildren are adults, so we're not bringing young children into the household. But I think that I remember, again, Rebbe Spetner told me this great idea, this great concept when I was doing chinuch classes with her years ago. I had 5 kids under 10.
Wow.
So I had, so that was one stage of my life. And now I have a 6th one that I had quite a bit later. And so there was this period when I had like 5 very young kids, and that went on for what seemed like a really long time, but now seems like it was over in a minute because they're all big now. And I remember her saying that you have to view your family like you're sitting down at the dinner table. It's funny because I always have dinner, and you have kids sitting at the dinner table, and that kid's kicking the other kid under the table. And you say to that kid, okay, you move and go and sit on the other side. And they say, no, I don't want to sit on the other side because I don't want to sit next to him because he smells, or because he's annoying or whatever. So then you sort of go, okay, well, why don't you sit 2 seats away from the child over there on the table, right? So that now I've got everybody there. So Rebbe Spetner said, the most important thing is to keep the child at the table. What you don't want is to have the situation where the child storms off and leaves the table. That's like the checkmate you were talking about, where they check out, right? Like the She'ena Yodeh Lishal, or the one who isn't even there, right?
Yeah,
like the 5th son in the Haggadah, right? So the metaphorical 5th son. So you don't want them to check out of the conversation, right? So you want them to be present, and you want them to stay at the table. And she says sometimes you have to build a really, really big table, right? And now I think you've been in my house. I actually have a very, very big dining room table. I have a huge, long dining room table that's wooden. And I visualize this table a lot. And Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, I'm so blessed that all of our children and stepchildren do choose to sit around our table.
Wow.
And that's physically and metaphorically. Now, sometimes we have to extend, the table is fully extended anyway. Sometimes the one wants to sit at one end and one wants to sit at the other, but they choose to all sit at the table. And that is as a credit to them. I think it's also a credit to the fact that we try, and we don't always get it right, but we try to make the table big enough that there's space for everybody. So we don't require of them to agree with one another or to change who they are because there's another child. Obviously, there's always some basic rules in a household, how a household functions. But ultimately, we create a space where the children, and by the way, the children's friends, can come and go freely.
Your house is known as quite an inviting place amongst the teenagers of Northwest London.
It definitely it is. It less so now because they're older, but it was always, but that was the concept, which is that we would like them all to feel that they have a seat at the table. So I've always held that value system. And my husband also is an extremely generous soul and extremely non-judgmental. He's raised his children to be extremely non-judgmental and extremely open-hearted and open-spirited, I guess. And so I'm very lucky that everybody has adopted that mentality, and they're all extremely respectful of one another, extremely respectful of us, and they also know how to put their boundaries. This is, we're coming for this and not for that. It's fine, and we have to be at peace with that. I would love to have them all there every day around my table for dinner, all 10 of them, but life doesn't work that way, and I have to respect that they have their own lives and their own choices. And I'm very, very grateful when they do choose to show up. I don't take it for granted.
I want to wrap up with a couple of questions, although I could go on definitely talking, and maybe we'll do it at some point, maybe even do a part 2 at some point, because there's definitely lots more to discuss. I also think that you're one of the things that you can bring to the table is that you've followed a model of empowerment and can then look at the long-term game, which is it's a good vantage point to have.
We should bring all the kids on or have a family.
We could definitely do that. We have to buy a few more microphones, but
you could bring some of them on, yeah.
I'd love to. Honestly, I'd love to. One of the things I try and do is get young adults on to talk about their teenage years, and we may or may not have one of your sons already booked in.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. We might have to do it on Zoom, though, because he's not currently in the UK. But I
don't know which one it is, but they're all coming back for Pesach time.
Of course. So okay, well, I didn't want to reveal. It was going to be a secret.
It's fine, no problem.
So looking back now at your older children, if you could pick one thing that mattered most, what was it?
that mattered most to them, to me? Just
Mattered most in getting the relationship to where it is now, which thank God seems to be in a really sort of strong, positive, as you considered, everyone around the table, a loving relationship with the principles there.
It would have been really easy for me to answer this question. A few years ago, I would have said to you, it's open communication. And obviously communication is really important, but I don't think it's the most important. I think the most important thing has been any work that I've done on myself. The most important thing in my relationship with any of my children, including my adult children, is my own self-regulation. And it's all my self-dysregulation. Any dysregulation is the most damaging thing, more damaging than any action or any mistake or any, like mum guilt stuff. When I'm in my integrity, when I'm operating as my best self, they are most able to connect with that. They are the most, that's where I'm able to parent them the most, is when I'm being the most integrated version of myself. And that is not a small thing. We are so externally focused in the world, and particularly as parents. What am I doing for that child? What am I telling them? What am I advising them? What am I saying to them? What am I asking of them? What am I not asking of them? What am I going to raise? What am I going to not raise? All of that stuff. And we could talk for hours about all of those things. But I think that who I am is the most important thing. And the thing that my adult children will talk about most is my development as a person, more than anything that I said or did. I wish I could tell you that it's like that it's something that I said or did or I just think
I love that answer because it leans into what we were discussing before about bechira. Because ultimately I would say I'd argue that's where your bechira sits 100%. as a person. Is I can't control other people's actions.
100%.
I can't. I can only control my own. That's what Hashem gave me the koach to do. You can influence, you can, as I said before, you can facilitate, but I love that answer.
And fulfilling my responsibilities to them in the best way that I can, and being okay.
That normally happens. Don't worry. We have this every week. It will come back on.
It's fine. And being okay with the fact that I've done my best.
Right.
And that they may never, ever agree with a decision or a position or a value or whatever. And I have to be okay with that, because the more I try and force them, like you said, to see it from my perspective or believe it or show me that it's just, with adult children, it's just a waste of time.
Yeah, no, totally. If you've got last two questions.
Yeah.
If you've got a parent that's listening or watching right now that's going through a crisis, what would you say to them?
I'm really sorry that it's like, I'm sorry that you're going through this experience, and you're not alone. Whatever the experience is, you're not alone. And please find people that can sit with you in the space, whatever space you're in, not because they can take it away or they can fix it, but because the people that can sit with you in the challenges that you experience are helping to regulate your nervous system incomparably over anything else, and that will allow you to show up best for your children if you're regulated. And the best way to be regulated is not to be isolated, in my opinion. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be alone. Some people are okay being alone physically, but not being isolated. So that my first thing would just be loads and loads of empathy for their situation, and like I'm not actually, but like I'm with you in it and I'm here. The second thing would be that everything takes a lot longer than you think it's going to. So we have this arbitrary idea that something happens, whatever it is. Let's use divorce as an example. And you think that a year later, I'm going to be okay. Like it's going to take a year and then I'm going to be okay. And it's not true. Grief also. You think that you're going to get to the end of Avelis and you're going to be okay. It's not true. I'm really sorry to tell you, it takes longer than that to be okay. Whatever okay means, there's a new version of yourself that emerges. And but people always say, but how long am I going to feel this bad? Like how long is it going to feel this awful? And I would say for real life-changing crises, it takes 2 years. Your average it takes is 2 years to get back to yourself. And people somehow find that reassuring. I remember sitting there Googling, how long will it take until I'm okay again? There's something about having like an end point. And I would say you should assume 2 years to recover from a major crisis. And that's once the immediate crisis is over. It takes about 2 years. That doesn't mean for 2 years you're going to be dysfunctional or you're not able to cope with the world. But when you are planning your process of moving through something, you should assume that it's going to take longer than you think it's going to take to recover. And my experience and the experience of many people that I've supported and sat through things with is that it takes around 2 years. It's not an on and off switch. It's not that you're not fine and then 2 years later you are. It's a process. It's a continuum that evolves. So that would be the second thing. And the third thing is that I would say when we had small children, I think most parents of small children have heard someone say this, which is if the child's trying to get your attention and they're jumping up and down and they're annoying you, mummy, 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 or daddy, 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 get down on your knees and get to their level, like eye to eye, and they will regulate, and then you'll be able to regulate. I remember someone saying it to me when I had babies that were up at night crying. They said, if it's dark and the baby's waking you up at night and you feel stressed, look at your baby, make eye contact with your baby, because physiologically we're created by Hashem in a way that when you see the baby, you get an oxytocin release, which makes you feel empathy towards the baby. And it's the same thing with small children. If you get to their level and you make eye contact with them, human to human, we feel that way. When we make eye contact, we feel connected. And I would say, however hard your experience is, make that human to human connection with your kids, and you'll be able to give them so much more than you think you can. We think that we need to shut off in our room or keep distance or, I'm here, I'm busy. But that human to human connection, that is the best tool in the middle of a crisis, because sometimes you have literally nothing else to give except for eye contact, physical touch. It could be a hug or holding their hand or something, or a point of connection, and take your life 15 minutes at a time, sometimes 5 minutes at a time. Know that you've got this kind of 2-year thing, which is short enough that feels recoverable, but long enough that it's not you're not expecting it to be immediate, and then dial it right back and just function 15 minutes at a time through connection, through eye contact, through physical proximity. Just be present. Don't check out. And if they're abroad, do it. If your kids are abroad, do it by, it could be superficial communication, but just something that's a point of common humor or a common interest. Don't try and solve problems from in the midst of the chaos.
And lastly, if you've got a teenager who's listening or watching right now and they're in the middle of a family upheaval, what is it that you'd like them to hear?
I think that from me, they need to hear that your parents are going to be okay. That there is an end to this. It might take a while and things might look different, but your parents, people are resilient. People are resilient, and your parents are going to navigate a way through this. And your responsibility is just to navigate your way through it. And if they can't show up for you, it doesn't mean that they're never going to be able to show up for you again. But you, as a teenager, you are actually able, you have the capacity to show up for yourself. You have the capacity to give yourself space and time and compassion. And although it might feel like your support system has been pulled out from underneath you, within yourself is a capacity for resilience and survival, which is far greater than you realize. And if you have a relationship with Hashem, lean into that and into a relationship with yourself, and take care of yourself. Look after yourself. Talk to yourself in the mirror, talk to yourself in your head, take yourself an extra soft blanket when you go to bed. Look after yourself. Self-parent. Look after yourself until your parents are in a position to do so. And don't try and take responsibility for looking after them. And don't try and take responsibility for looking after your siblings. If you think that that's the way to help, what ends up happening is that ends up backfiring later on in life. Your primary response, it doesn't mean you can't be helpful. You can, clean the dishes or something, just normal, helpful things. But don't use the other people's pain as a distraction from your own experience. Be in your experience, be in your pain, be in your challenge. Find the people that will support you. Find the rabbonim or the therapists or the teachers or the mentors or that will support you. I would advise you find them over your own peers, because unless your peers have been through the same thing, they're not the best source of advice. So find safe adults that you feel are able to hold space for you. Reach out to them, and maybe we can signpost some resources, but find safe adults who can hold space for you, and experiment with looking after yourself just for 5 minutes at a time. I'd say the same thing that I say to adults in that regard. Just take it 5 minutes at a time. Just say, like, I really need reassurance now. I really need comfort now. I really need time now. Just experiment with giving it to yourself for 5 minutes, and just know that you are far more resilient than you know, and you can do this. You've got this. You're going to be okay. You are okay. Actually, inherently you are okay, and you're going to feel that okayness if you take the time to sit in this experience and not try and run away from it. If you do try and run away from it, unfortunately, they tend to come back at other stages and interfere with your life. So stay with it. Sit with it. Surround yourself with good people. Take it 5 minutes at a time, and your own inner well-being is going to shine through, and you're going to find a way to see what's already there.
Wow. Thank you, Charlotte, for coming on. I really appreciate that. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, either you feel free now to give an email address. I wouldn't say put your phone number. If you feel free, or if you have a professional or something, you can put it in afterwards, whatever you feel comfortable with.
They can. You can email me at charlottekalms@gmail.com. We can put it on the notes or whatever under the podcast.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate you coming on.
Hello again. Did you know that statistically speaking, most listeners of podcasts do not hit the subscribe button? It's a very small press, but it makes a massive difference to us and will literally help us keep going. Thank you so much, and enjoy your day.